On today's Locked On Jayhawks, has Kansas figured something out with the two-man game with Zeke Mayo and Hunter Dickinson?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here at D Johnson Radio. He's Nick Schwerdt at Nick_Schwerdt, and this is Locked On Jayhawks. Thank you for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition, we're going to be going over the little Hunter-Zeke two-man game we got to see a little bit in the NC State game. Is this a solution for KU to kind of reach its peak, reach its potential, or what does that solution look like for KU to hit that point? It's also finals week for KU, so we're going to be assigning grades to some different categories and different things related to KU athletics, and then we'll finish up with whose stat line is it anyway. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by the College Football Playoff on TNT. It is finally here, and you don't want to miss a moment of the action. College Football Playoff presented by Allstate begins with 4 first-round games, December 20th and 21st on ESPN, ABC, TNT, and Max. All right, so let's start there. Nick, I found it very interesting that in the NC State game, it felt like we saw more of like Zeke Mayo, Hunter Dickinson actions together. It's not that we hadn't seen it. It just seemed like there was more of it, and it worked at a really high level against NC State. Was it enough to make you think that a 15-point win over NC State showing something like that, like is that enough to make you think this team is going to be better than the week before, or are you still concerned about a lot of the flaws that they've shown?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly an encouraging sign. I think specifically with Zeke, because we have a tendency to pool all the transfers together, all the newcomers. You put him in the same bucket as you would AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin, but it's not really the case because Zeke's been playing all year. We can talk about the fluctuating minutes for the other guys, but game in, game out, Zeke is like, if we want to look at the big three, the 3 returning starters from last year, he's right up there with those guys in terms of being a constant presence on the court. So finding a way to get him going and letting him kind of like going back to the NC State game, you kind of let him be the Zeke Mayo that he was at South Dakota State when he was an initiator. He was handling the ball more. You let him kind of work with the ball in his hands, and you got to see what I thought was a more comfortable Zeke. He's not worried about, okay, how do I take parts of what I did there and then kind of mix them with what they want me to do here. It seemed like, at least for 40 minutes, they said, no, just go be the guy we recruited. Go be the guy who is an offensive initiator, a get your own bucket guy. And then all the other stuff that he was doing before, which is knocking down open jumpers, that came as well. So it just seemed like he was much more comfortable with what was being asked of him, and he's not going to score 26 every night. I mean, he made it look really easy against NC State, and I don't think every defense, especially when we get into Big 12 play, is going to let that happen. But I was pretty encouraged by that because it wasn't a one-off like it would be if it was AJ Storr or Rylan Griffin who went out there and scored 25.
Yeah, it's something you can repeat, you can continue to do. And it's not even like, to the same idea what you said with them scoring 25, if you would have won the game on going 12 of 18 from 3, it's like, well, that's not going to happen every night. You can run the two-man actions over and over again with Zeke Mayo and Hunter Dickinson. And again, like I said, they've done them in other games, but it felt like we saw that more in this game. It felt like in other games it's been more of DeJuan Harris, initiating the actions. And I this just makes more sense to me because when you do look at Zeke Mayo and Hunter Dickinson, what's the knock against both players? It's the defensive side of the ball. I think for Hunter, more so in specific matchups, if it's a team who can space you out. For Zeke, maybe more if it's like a quick guard that, you didn't bring him in to be a lockdown defender. You brought in Zeke Mayo to be a shot maker, to be a three-point shooter, to be a scorer for you. The reason you have Hunter Dickinson is to be a scorer for you. So if you are, it's almost backwards when you let DeJuan Harris run the show. And again, DeJuan's been good this year. Like I don't want to take away from that.
And he was fantastic against NC State. So it's not like you have to choose one or the other.
Right. I'm just saying,
like they were both great together.
Correct. But I think the point here for me is that some of the other games where it's been just DeJuan being the ball handler right? It shouldn't be an extreme. It shouldn't be Zeke Mayo's taking 90% of the pick and roll possessions. It shouldn't be DeJuan's taking 90%. It should be a happy medium between the two, because it just makes sense if you're saying, hey, we have these good offensive players. Oh, let's not use them as much on offense. Whereas with DeJuan, it's like, oh, we have this good defensive player. Let's use him a ton on offense. It almost felt a little backwards to me. But at the same point in time, even though I do think that was something they can move forward with, that's going to be a problem for a lot of teams to guard, I still look at some of the issues of this team. Like, they're not a good offensive rebounding team. They're not a team who forces a ton of turnovers. That still didn't happen in the NC State game. I look at the fact that they still shot 40% from three. Like, I don't know. I guess I'm almost to a point where I wonder if this team is just basically last year's team repurposed with more 3-point variance. Like, does that make sense? Like, they have more ability to go off from three on this year's team than last year's team, I think, because you have more options. But I think it's pretty similar in how things go about.
Well, I think even to that last point about the 3-point variance, it's easy to do this after the NC State game where you took 24 threes, but going into that game, you looked at their roster side by side to last year, to your point. You'd say, okay, well, they have a lot more shooters, a lot more guys that can space the floor. The problem was
the volume of shooting is not really going up. Yeah,
they weren't doing it. So that's a different conversation. I hope it becomes that. Honestly, if you told me right now that that's what this team would be, it would be similar to last year's team, but with more 3-point shooting variance, I would take that. Because right now, it's not even that. Right now, it is you went out all off season with a centered focus of going and getting more shooters, going and getting more scorers, and you don't use them. I mean, they play sometimes, but they're not there to shoot and score. So it's like, what exactly is the plan here? You got a bunch of different guys, but you're playing the exact same style of basketball as you were last year. Because ultimately, I think that is where this team's strengths lie, with the shooting, with the scoring, with the wing depth. But we haven't seen them tap into those strengths. I don't know why. I mean, the default I will have for why isn't this guy playing more under head coach Bill Self is he probably isn't practicing hard, or he's not playing good enough defense. He's not crashing the glass hard enough. If you just gave me those three options, I would almost guarantee you that's one of the reasons why anybody you think should be playing more isn't playing more. So I hope that happens. I hope those guys can do whatever they need to do to get on the court, because that's how KU reaches its potential, is having a bunch of really talented scorers on the court together who can space the floor and let Hunter Dickinson look like he looked against NC State, which is one of the 5 best players in the country. But you can't do that unless you go all in on what you went all in on in the offseason.
If you had to pick one, Rylan, Griffin, AJ, Storr, you pick one of them to play to the level you would have expected coming into the offseason, who are you choosing and why?
AJ Storr, because he's better. He's a more talented player. Rylan Griffin against NC State. Do you have the box score in front of you?
I know combined Griffin and Storr, it was what, like 1 for 7, 1 for 8?
No, I want to know, how many minutes did Rylan Griffin play versus NC State? I'm like 2 clicks away here. He played 31 minutes. 31 minutes. And I left the game thinking, I didn't even hardly notice he was on the court. That's troubling to me. Like, you want to go about noticeability, you want to go about impact. The guy was on the court the entire game, and he didn't do anything.
Now, this takes into, I mean, there have been a lot of games that KU's played, much lesser opponents and blown them out, so it could just be tilted from those. Rylan Griffin is actually 3rd on KU in on-off net rating. DeJuan is 1st, Hunter is 2nd, Rylan Griffin is 3rd.
I don't know what that means, Derek. You have to explain what on-off net rating means.
So basically, you know what O rating is and D rating are, correct? Like, O rating is points per 100 possessions when you are on the court, okay? So how good your offense is per 100 possessions when you are on the court. Defensive rating, same thing with defense. How many points are you giving up per 100 possessions when you're on the court? So when you're on the court versus off the court, so basically you subtract the defensive rating from the offensive rating, right? If your O rating is 110, your D rating is 90, you'd be a plus 20 on net rating on off when you were on the court versus when you're off. So DeJuan is plus 27.6, which is in the 94th percentile nationally. So that's like very good, right? Hunter Dickinson, plus 16.6, 82nd percentile nationally. It's also very good. Rylan Griffin at plus 15.7, 81st percentile nationally. Does that just speak to like the fact that it's just the threat of having a shooter around Hunter Dickinson, maybe?
I mean, I think so. You mean, look what happened when KU went to those 4-guard lineups. All of a sudden, Hunter Dickinson got whatever he wanted. The double teams weren't coming. He was able to do what he does down low, which is barbecue chicken, worse big guys in the post. He's one of the best. He is one of the most efficient scorers in the country. Simply giving the ball to Hunter Dickinson in a one-on-one matchup down low is one of the easiest ways you can get a bucket in college basketball. The problem is when you have KJ Adams and DeJuan Harris on the floor with him, it makes life a lot more difficult because they don't respect those guys as shooters, especially when it's both of them on the court together. So again, bigger conversation about the lineups that KU needs to be utilizing moving forward. But I think it all kind of ties into the idea of, all right, we're looking to get you to your potential, you to your potential. The idea is that you put the best lineup on the floor and then you try and maximize those guys. We know KJ Adams is going to be KJ Adams. Whatever you think of him, he's going to be that guy regardless of whether he's playing with 2 shooters, 3 shooters. It doesn't really matter. We don't know the answer to those other questions. And I think over the course of the next month, 6 weeks, we're going to start seeing, it may not be like everybody wants it, like KU Twitter wants it to just be 4-guard lineups. KJ plays 15 minutes a night. That's not going to happen. But I do think this is the time of the year where you really start experimenting, trying different guys in different situations, and then hopefully you stumble upon the lineup, the rotation that you want to be using at the end of the year.
All right, let's get to some finals grades. This is Locked on Jayhawks. And this episode of the show is brought to you by the College Football Playoff on TNT. It's that time of the year. College Football Playoff is back, and now it's bigger and better than ever with the newly expanded 12-team format, guaranteed to bring you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT sports coverage of the College Football Playoff begins December 21st. That's this Saturday, starting with College Football Playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, leading into the first matchup, which is SMU, the Mustangs battling Penn State, Andy Kotelnicki, and the Nittany Lions. That is at noon at 11 Central. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. All right, continuing on, it is finals week for KU, so we're going to be giving out some grades to some things. What grade would you give to the collection of KU basketball's transfer portal additions so far?
So it's first semester, but I know I'm getting them all back second semester, right?
Yeah.
Going from Econ 101 to Econ 102. First semester, I'd give it a C plus. Slash.
What would it be without? Well, okay. This is what I find. I was actually having this thought because this will lead into what I was about to say about Diggy Coit. I was having this thought. How many players, and this is for everybody, not just transfers, how many players on KU right now could you say are overperforming their expectations from before the season? You could say, maybe DeJuan slightly. You could say that maybe Hunter Dickinson is at what the expectations are. How many are overperforming? Is the only answer Diggy Coit?
Yeah, but Diggy Coit's the obvious one. The underperforming are AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin.
I guess Zach Clements is overperforming, but that's such like a minuscule role.
I would say, I don't know, because this is where revisionist history kind of checks in, and I would say Flory is overperforming. He's not a transfer, but if we're going through the whole roster, and it would be easy to say, well, I mean, come on, he was a McDonald's All-American, he was a top 25 recruit. It's like, yeah. But the context of he's playing behind Hunter Dickinson, and he's a freshman big man playing for Bill Self. That usually doesn't go well. And he's done exactly what you'd want. Come out there, be athletic, dunk, rebound, defend, play hard. Like, that's everything you would want. So I would say Flory's overperforming. I would say Diggy's overperforming. Zeke has met expectations. You could argue KJ Adams is overperforming. And you know what? Frankly, I would argue that KJ Adams is overperforming. He's having the best. I mean, this is the best he's ever been. I can't.
Statistically, though, it's not. It's under. But I do agree. Like the impact, the defense, it is better than previous years. Yes.
And his efficiency is really good. There have been a couple of, I mean, go back to the Duke game. We turned on guys really quickly. He was out there like locking Cooper Flagg, the future number 1 pick, thought to be a generational prospect. I left that game thinking, this guy is a generational prospect. He just got shut down by a 6'5" small forward with T-Rex arms. But that,
ever since Henry Ellenson, you've been very anti-white guy going number 1. That's not European. So.
I don't remember. I'll tell you this. I don't remember my Henry Ellenson take, but whatever it was, I bet it was right, because what the hell did that guy ever do? What was the
Maybe it wasn't even him. Maybe it was Matthew Hurt. I don't even remember. It was one of those white big guys. Okay.
It was Matthew Hurt. And guess what? Checks out, because Matthew Hurt, where is he? I'm assuming he's in like the Bundesliga in Europe. Probably cashing checks, but I mean, lanky white big guys, and they're like, oh, but he's different. He can shoot, and he can put the ball in the deck. I'm like, okay, we'll see about that. Like, bro, if you have I thought he was going to make KJ not be able to play in that Duke game. I can't believe we haven't talked about this. I thought Cooper Flagg was going to make it to where KJ would only be able to play like 12 minutes a game. It's like, oh, he's 6'5". He's not a great defender. He plays hard, but this is the same dude who was practicing and scoring over Anthony Davis and LeBron James at the Olympic run. And all of a sudden, we met his kryptonite in KJ Adams. No. Okay, so this is what the real take is. Cooper Flagg bust. I don't know what the question was, but go ahead and lock that in.
Okay, love it. Love it. I should headline that on the graphic here. This one, Bill Self in the transfer portal era. What grade was you? So for me, I consider transfer portal era when they opened it up to you can just go without sitting out. So that would be the off season leading into the 2021 to 22 season, I believe. What grade?
So we're not counting. Remy Martin does not count.
No, he would. That would have been the first off season, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So it would have been the 22, the year they won the title. It would have been 23. They lose in the second round to Arkansas, and then last season, and then the beginning of this year. So basically 3.5 years.
Depends what kind of grade. I mean, how you want to grade him? Do you want to grade him on his ability to recruit top talent? Pretty good at that. Last year was the only one that you really flopped. Like Nick Timberlake was clearly not the answer. And again, like this offseason, you crushed it. You went out and got all the pieces on paper that you should get.
But are they recruiting too much for talent and not enough for fit? Like, is there a happy medium there?
What do you mean by that? Because if there are bad fits in this transfer class, what would have been a good fit? You don't have to give me like specific names, but what should they have done differently? They went out and got shooters and scorers.
I guess in my mind, I never really considered AJ Storr like a shooter. And maybe this is revisionist history. He's off to a slow start. Like the Rylan Griffin one, I totally get it. AJ Storr shot, 31% from 3 last year? Would you have been better off going for fit in that case where it's like, hey, instead of getting the most talented guy, let's go out and get like a 3-and-D player, right?
Yeah, but you know what? I think sometimes we have a tendency to think that there are just those guys out there everywhere waiting. And if I'm Bill Self, I'm at Kansas, right? I'm not at K-State. I'm not at Texas A&M, where it's like, oh, we need to get a guy who can fit. Like, realistically, you're at Kansas, you go get the best players. You go get the best players. AJ Storr was the best pure scorer on the open market. And I think, like, if you're trying to weigh risk versus reward, okay, yeah, he played at 5 high schools. He's at his 3rd college now. He kind of likes to do his own thing. Yeah, you would look at that and say, well, I'm not really sure that's going to fit here. But just like it was with Remy Martin, it's like, yeah, but if we can get him to buy into what we want to do, then he raises our ceiling more than some dude who can just knock down 38% of threes and play some defense. Because those 3-and-D guys, we like to, like in the NBA, 3-and-D, oh, you like a solid role player. In college basketball, 3-and-D guys are highly coveted. Like, those are the dudes that everybody wants, because it's not like the NBA where you can just go and pluck a 35% three-point shooter off a tree. Like, it's hard to come by. And so I think what they did with Zeke and Rylan gave them the ability to go out and take a risk on a really high upside player. So all in all, I'm giving Bill Self an A. I'm giving Bill Self an A because I think the jury's still out. I know people are kind of down right now because a couple of the guys aren't playing and it doesn't really seem like it's meshing. It's a lot of basketball to be played. We've got a couple of games and then Big 12 play. So I think there's a really decent chance that by March, KU's one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the country again, and some of these dudes are starting to hit their stride.
So since that 2021 offseason, in national titles, KU is second. Final Fours, KU is second. Big 12 titles, they are first. Winning percentage is 77.5. Bill Self's career is 76.6. Though at KU, it's a little over 80, so I guess that's down a tad. NCAA tournament wins, they have 8 in that span, which Duke has 8. North Carolina, Houston, Purdue, Gonzaga have 7. Tennessee, Alabama have 6. Arizona, Iowa State, Illinois, Michigan State each have 4. Marquette, Baylor has 3. Auburn has 2. Kentucky has 1. So, yeah, it's not ideal that you have only made the second weekend one time in that span. But also, if Bill Self was coaching in 2023, I'd like to think they beat Arkansas and make the second weekend. So, yeah, I would agree. I don't think it's an A+, but it is an A. It is an A or an A- in my mind. Okay, quicker on these two. Kansas football's portal haul so far, double-digit commits so far.
Hey, right? It has to be. I think that this is going to be kind of a weird sort of offseason. You bring in a new OC, you bring in a new DC. You don't really know, like, how Lance Leipold is going to navigate the transfer portal era, because while they've done it in the past, this is the biggest roster overhaul they've had, the biggest amount of turnover, the biggest number of starters that you're losing. So next year is going to be really interesting because we're going to see how this staff is at developing young talent, but also trying to infuse it in with transfers. So I'm going to give it an A so far. I don't know how you couldn't, based off just the sheer volume of names they brought in.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be picky, you could say, oh, they still need more receivers or they still need more of this, but that stuff's coming. So I think to this point in time, I agree. KU football's chances of making a bowl game in 2025, what grade would you give that?
I would give it C-. So I would think the odds are against it slightly, right? They didn't make a bowl game this year, and I think their roster is going to be worse next year. So a C- might be giving them too much credit, because this is, I mean, yeah, you could say, well, they should have won more than 5 this year, but they didn't. So I'm going to say, yeah, like I would probably set the over-under for wins next year at 4.5.
I think the Big 12 is just such a crapshoot that like you could stumble your way into 6-6 next season very easily, just a reversion in 1-score games. I'll give it a I don't know, Jalen Daniels back. I'll be optimistic. B-. Let's finish up. We got a little whose stat line is it anyway. This is Locked On Jayhawks. And this episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. All you got to do, visit FanDuel.com, and you can join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. I saw over on FanDuel, you can get Kansas to make the Final Four at 4-1 odds if you're interested in that. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. This episode of the show is also brought to you by Prize Picks, the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million members and sign up today. They invented the flex play, which means you can still get cash out if your lineup isn't perfect, right? I mean, you don't have to go 5 for 5. You can go 4 for 5. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't end up hitting. Join now, because this holiday season, Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas. Think James Cook is going to get more than 60 yards this week? Well, you can cook up your own hot takes with your friends. Win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Finishing up, we got a little whose stat line is it anyway for you. So which of these categories, if the season ended today, these are team stats, would either be top 3, so best among Bill Self's time at Kansas, or bottom 3, so among the worst in Bill Self's time at Kansas? We have offensive turnover rate, so the percentage of possessions that they're turning the ball over. Offensive rebound rate, explanatory there. Free throw attempt rate, 2-point percentage on offense, national rank of 3-point attempt rate. So not just their 3-point attempt rate, but where they rank, nationally, because obviously that has changed as the years have gone on. And the last one here would be defensive rebound rate. How many of those, 4, 5, 6 categories? How many are either top 3 or bottom 3 in Bill Self's tenure if the season ended today?
I think defensive rebounding is a strength, so I'm going to say that's top 3. I'm going to say offensive rebounding is bottom 3. I know they don't turn the ball over a ton, and they don't shoot a ton of threes. So I'm going to say turnover rate is top 3, and 3-point attempts is bottom 3. And to be honest with you, those are the only ones I remember. You listed off like 8 stats, so I don't remember the other ones, but I feel confident about those 4.
It was kind of a trick question. It's all of them. All of them are either top 3 or bottom 3. So this is just like the most roller coaster Bill Self team. The top 3 best right now, if the season ended today, this would be the best offensive turnover rate of the Bill Self era. It would be the best 2-point percentage of the Bill Self era, but that's one that that's just going to go down because conference play. But also it would be the number 1 defensive rebound rate team of the Bill Self era, which that's very interesting because they have had some good rebound teams. But this would also be the second worst offensive rebound rate team of the Bill Self era. You can probably guess the first worst. It was last year. This is the worst free throw attempt rate team of the Bill Self era, and it's not even close to second place. And then this would be in the bottom 3 for national rank of 3-point attempt rate.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when you look at how KU gets their points, it's either Hunter Dickinson down low. We talked all season last year about how he never gets to the free throw line, despite the fact that he's always got 2 guys on him. But because of the way they've played, they don't have great spacing, which means they don't get a ton of open looks, and they don't have driving lanes. So that stuff could be fixable if you're optimistic about them changing their style of play. The most interesting one to me, though, Derek, is the defensive rebounding, because on paper you'd say, well, outside of Hunter, and none of the guys that are in that rotation are great rebounders. But then you think about what happens when Hunter takes a seat. It's Flory Badunga, and he gets every defensive rebound as well. So for 40 minutes a game, whoever is in at the 5 spot, assuming it's not going to be Zach Clements, which, we can all hope, you have an elite defensive rebounder on the floor. I don't really know how you would equate that number to wins, but it's not something I would have expected before the year.
No, but you look at it, and right now, for instance, on Ken Palm, Kansas still has a top 10 defense in the country. And they do have certain flaws, as we've mentioned, if you can space Kansas out, if you can shoot threes, which isn't every team, then that could give them some issues. But part of the reason why they're ranked so high in defensive rebounding is a part of defense. You are closing out the possession and not allowing more. So, that's a good one to have. All right, he's Nick Schwerdt. Nick, what can you find right now? What do you got going on?
You can check out our podcast, Could Be Wrong, wherever you get your podcasts. We also have the full episodes up on YouTube.
All right, and that'll do it for this episode here. Locked on Jayhawks. We'll see you next time with LOJ. We'll have a KU Brown preview coming at you on Friday. See you then.